from one presidential contender to another. 2020 presidential contender Jay Inslee joins me now. Governor, I'm sorry that I was late. Right there, we were sharing some sound from Vice President Joe Biden speaking to reporters. I don't know if you heard what he said, but what was interesting, he was criticizing all who were attacking him last night and decisions he and President Obama made over the 8 years they were in office. And he basically said, you're looking at 3 years ago, wake up and realize all bets are off. What the president has done in the last 3 years is so damaging from an economic, from a foreign policy, from an education, from a judicial standpoint. Stop looking at the past, get in the present. The game has changed. Is there any value to what he's saying?
Well, listen, there is a point. This is about the future. And I had a very, I think, vigorous exchange with the vice president last night, because if we are going to have a future, we have to save ourselves from the looming catastrophe of the climate crisis. It is about this future, about saving literally humanity on the planet. I have a plan to do that, and I expressed disappointment in the vice president's failure to propose a plan to do what is scientifically necessary. So yes, it is about the future, but I think what he has proposed is too little, too late, and therefore too dangerous. I have proposed what's called the gold standard on how to build a clean energy economy, grow jobs in Michigan and Pennsylvania in the clean energy economy with union jobs. So it is about the future, and I was proud about the message we had last night, which is resonating. We've had a huge spike of interest. I've had almost 10,000 donations in the last 24 hours. It's the biggest night for us since actually twice as much as the day we started our campaign. So I think the message I talked about last night is resonating. It is about wanting to have a future by having a president who will defeat climate change, and I'm up to that task. If
we don't have an inhabitable planet and clean air, everything else is pointless. But there were some things that didn't get focused on last night that maybe should have. In hindsight, when you look at the economy, the president all day long boasts that we have the best economy ever. But 10 miles away from where you were in Michigan, you got a GM plant closing today. Was it a missed opportunity not to focus on the broken economy?
Well, yes, and I hope that we have more time. We have to have a presidential nominee who will focus on ending income inequality and will realize that half of Americans have not had substantive raises in the last 20 years. And we got to have a person who will robustly try to rebuild the union movement. I was actually the first candidate in the first debate to bring up the need to help unions get back on their feet. These are the people who brought us the weekend. They now need to bring people raises. We have to raise the minimum wage, and I've helped create the highest minimum wage in the United States. We have to get people raises, and I'm proud that I've been able to get the highest educator pay raise this year in the United States. So yes, we need to do these things. Donald Trump is horrifically out of touch with the lives of real Americans. This is not about, he lives in a Mar-a-Lago universe. We live in a universe of plants shutting down in Michigan. We will have a nominee if we have somebody who's really standing up for working people, and I'm willing to do that.
You also said at the first debate, the biggest geopolitical risk we face is Donald Trump. That argument wasn't made over the last two nights, and the White House is saying it was a win for them last night. The White House looked at all of that infighting and said this is exactly what we wanted to happen. What do you say to that?
No, we're going to have a nominee to defeat Donald Trump. I don't know how he considers himself a winner. Last night I said something that I believe, that is that white nationalism does not belong in the White House. If he considers that a win, he's a sick person. He's not winning when he's dividing this nation. We will be united in part because we understand universally throughout the party the threat that he represents to the nation. And I'm looking forward to future debates, and I hope people can go to jayinslee.com right now and send in $1 to make sure that the climate message stays on the stage to help that happen. I need to be on the stage to push that. If people share my view, go to jayinslee.com. I'd appreciate it.
You did call out the president last night. It's a big statement to say the person living in the White House is a white nationalist. But at the same time, your messaging isn't resonating with the African-American community. You're polling in the negative while Joe Biden is at 53%. How do you plan to address this?
I introduced myself to the community. I was in a predominantly black community, zip code 48217 in Detroit. Yesterday, it was the third time I'd visited, and I think if you talk to folks there, they'll realize that I've embodied the need to have environmental justice in our climate change plans. I've been very active in my state fighting racial disparity. I was one of the first governors to offer pardons to folks who've been caught up in the drug laws. I've eliminated the death penalty. We've now taken major steps to end the school-to-prison pipeline. We've reestablished affirmative action in my state. We're a state that has embraced diversity as a virtue, and I was the very first governor, and I'm proud of this, to stand up against Donald Trump's racist Muslim ban. So I'm ready to take up the need to reunite this country after the damage that has been caused by Donald Trump, and I look forward to getting to know folks during this campaign.
The one thing that has stood in the way of the president being able to advance parts of his agenda, like the Muslim ban, are the courts. And that wasn't discussed last night. The federal judicial system. This week alone, the Senate advanced 13 of President Trump's lifetime judicial appointments. Mitch McConnell is very good at pumping conservative judges through. President Trump's most loyal base, evangelicals, can look and say we've got 2 Supreme Court justices and a record number of federal judges. Is that something Democrats should be focused on?
Yes, and we are focused on it in my state. We have now
didn't hear it last night.
Donald Trump. Well, give me 30 more seconds and I'll share with you. Actually, last night I did say that we have now beat Donald Trump in my state 21 times in a row. Our excellent Attorney General Bob Ferguson, we're 21-0 defeating Donald Trump on the Muslim ban, on child separation, on a whole host of issues. So we understand that. Now, I have to express some disappointment with my competitors who are in the Senate. I don't think they've been recognizing that we have to take away the filibuster from Mitch McConnell. We have to stop giving him a pass. They've approved his judge selections so they can go on recess. These are lifetime appointments. These lifetime appointments, stopping Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump from putting these judges, these conservative judges on the bench, is more important than their vacation, frankly. So I'm expressing a little disappointment. We need to stand up strong against Mitch McConnell in the Senate. That is the only way our progressive agenda will advance, and I'm committed to that.
Do you have an uphill battle? I mean, we know where you're polling. You haven't yet qualified for the next debate. Climate change is massively important. You have a deep understanding that it's not just about the environment. It impacts every aspect of our life. But do you have to convince millions of Americans to make this a top priority? For many, it's abstract. For others, they won't even acknowledge it.
Well, listen, it's not an abstraction when your house burns down in California or your farm's flooded in the Midwest or the seas are taking over the first floor of your house in Florida. This is a real thing. Americans are moving very rapidly on this. I believe that this is a message. It is the vital question of our time. And we're going like gangbusters. Great momentum in the last 24 hours. That message I had last night, that I was unique in making this a top priority, is resonating with thousands of people. I hope others will join us at jinslee.com. And with that, I got to catch a plane to go win some votes out west.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.